And here we are on the Hyundai Texans radio studio with Executive Vice President and General Manager Nick Caserio. Nick, how's it going?
Mark,
Happy New Year. Merry Christmas.
Same to you.
And no Johnny Harris today, so it's next man up. I'm the next man up here, Nick, so let's go.
You'll handle yourself very well. Not worried.
I'll ask you about the opponent question and all that, but let's start with, I know we have the Titans coming up, but the Cleveland Browns game obviously did not go according to plan. A lot to handle with Joe Flacco and company.
Yeah, bottom line is Cleveland played better than we did. They made a lot of plays. We didn't make enough plays. Really got behind the eight ball there and tried to make, it's somewhat interesting there at the end. But the explosive plays were a big part of it. We talked about that going into the game, having to eliminate those. And the first play of the game, the ball goes over our head. So I think there's things we can certainly learn from and try to correct, make sure that it doesn't happen here moving forward. So it's always disappointing anytime you lose. But the reality is we got to flip the page and get ready for, a good opponent that we just saw here, a few weeks ago.
We talk about every week being different, but is every week different sometimes in the sense of, hey, we just have to flush that one, forget about that one, because you have the Titans who you just got ready for a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, good or bad, whatever happens, that game, you don't want it to impact the next game, and there might be some things schematically that you're not going to deal with. And I think as you transition to playing a team that you've seen recently, a lot of it is personnel related to see who's in, who's out. They've made some adjustments and modifications. We've had to make some adjustments and modifications. So I think you just go back and sort of have a better understanding of the team that you recently played. There's some things that came up in the game both ways that we can certainly learn from. And I think the big thing is just refamiliarizing yourself, reorienting yourself with the opponent, and then just some of the personnel changes that they've made. So that's the way that the league is built. You have 17 opportunities essentially over the course of the year, and whatever happens that existing week or previous week, it really in the end is not going to impact what happens, and really unless you allow it to.
All right, we're not going to talk about injuries, but what happens when injuries occur? For instance, in that game, for a big chunk of it, you're out there with two defensive ends and two safeties that weren't even with the team when the season began, but that's life in the NFL sometimes, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you have contingency plans in place as best you can. What happens is just may affect the rotation or how the play time is distributed in that situation. So once it happens, then you just have to understand what the diagnosis is. Is the player going to be available? Is he out for the duration of the game? Does he have an opportunity to come back? Do we have to get through a period of time, or we're going to have to play the rest of the game without that player? So then really what happens is whatever happens offensively, defensively, you have to look at the kicking game because some of those players may have had a bigger or smaller role based on what they were doing in the other phase. So, that's our responsibility, and as a coaching staff, just try to take the information process and try to make good decisions in real time.
Well, here we are. It's the holiday season. We acknowledge the work of a lot of people in the building, and you have a lot of people work on injured players, Nick. Can you take us inside a little bit to paint the picture of what happens when a player is recovering from an injury? I know it varies depending on the injury, but you have so many people involved in that process of getting them back on the field.
No, absolutely. It's very comprehensive. So you have the initial diagnosis, so the medical team is a huge part of that. And then once a player is diagnosed, then whatever they're physically able to do, they'll start their rehabilitative process. So that's trainers, that's sports performance staff, that's strength and conditioning staff, and we have people that are involved in returning the player. They're kind of return to play sort of protocol, that process. So there's various touch points, and depending on where they are in their evolution of their rehab stage, some people may have a larger impact relative to others, but there's a lot of people that are involved in that. And what you try to do is just collectively have an understanding of where that player is in his progression and where they are. If you know the player is really not going to be a factor for multiple weeks, then he's really more in a true rehab state. Once they get to a point where they might be able to transition back to football, then there's another step that's involved. But there's a lot of people. We've allocated a lot of time and resources to that particular area. I think the players are appreciative. We're certainly appreciative of ownership giving us the opportunity to do so, and we have, we're fortunate to have a lot of good people in those areas. So the big thing is once a player is injured, what can we do to get the player back in the safest way possible? And if we have to err on the side of caution, I think our thought process has been maybe let's hold a player an extra week if we can, if that's the best thing for them, and just try to figure out a way to play the game without him.
I know you have a lot of equipment in the building, but how much does it help being in Houston with the greatest medical center? And I know Houston Methodist is a huge partner.
No question. We're in the hub of, I would say, medical care from Houston Methodist to MD Anderson. So we're very fortunate to be in the situation that we're in, to have access to as many top-notch medical care people as any in the country.
All right, so game planning, and I know we talked to the coaches about this too, but game planning without knowing who's available, it does affect things as you face different opponents and their strengths that you have to deal with.
Yeah, you have your core plan in place, and then it's just, all right, is this player going to be available? Or if he is, then maybe we can call a few more things, a few more of these items. If he's not going to be available, maybe we err on the side of that, and then who's going to handle the bulk of that responsibility or role? So injuries are always very fluid. We try to, as best we can, in the early part of the week, have an understanding. Is the player available this week? Great. If he is or isn't, no problem. Then you have players, well, we'll have a little bit better idea by Friday or Saturday, so go all the way up to game time. We went through that going back to the Atlanta game. We had a situation where kind of Shaq Griffin was touch and go. Worked him out before pregame. All right, in the end, probably not going to be available, so we transitioned to the next one. We went through that with Nico in Tennessee actually a few weeks ago. Worked Nico out before the game, had a shot. In the end, we felt the best thing for him was maybe not to play so they could be available the following week. So it's case by case, and you just have to be adaptable and be very flexible. But the core of what you're going to do probably is going to change all that much relative to who's going to be available.
How about Dameon Pierce returning that kickoff for a touchdown? And that's really using the players you have to work with in different ways, and those conversations have to be taking place all the time.
Yeah, no question. It's something DP hadn't done for a while, probably going back to high school. I'm sure if you ask him, or he might have mentioned that. But I'd say my experience has actually been sometimes kickoff returners, when you have a running back, I'd say a kickoff return, sometimes you want maybe somebody that has a little bit more playing strength in the hand, because there's going to be a contact element. So we went through this when I was in New England with Brandon Bolden. Brandon hadn't returned kickoffs very much at all, and then we put him back there on kickoff return. So as a kickoff returner, there's a certain level of strength, instinctiveness, vision that are involved, and usually running backs have some of those qualities. But I'd say the blocking on a couple of those returns was as good as some of the blocking that we had over the course of the season. And Dameon did a good job with the ball in his hands. So inevitably on kickoff returns, it's kind of like punt returns as well. You're going to probably have to make one or two tacklers miss on your own, just like you are at running back. So a play is blocked or designed to get X number of players. There might be somebody that's free on that play. But that was certainly a big play in the game, kind of gave us a little bit of momentum. The game was, 14-0, then to get it to 14-7, you're kind of one-score game. So at least puts you in a position. But credit to Dameon for his attitude. It's something that he embraced during the course of the week, really worked diligently at it during the week. And, to see him go out there and actually have some production certainly reinforces that whole idea.
Nick, with all the scouting you do and observing what other opponents are doing, one thing that stands out to me this time of year is how many teams have, say, 5 wins or whatever the number is. They might appear to be out of it, but they put up really good performances. And the Texans eliminated the Titans a couple of weeks ago, but they really gave Seattle, a hard-charging team for the playoffs, all they could handle last week. And it's hard to measure that kind of stuff. You just don't know, but I guess you got to be ready for anything.
Yeah, Tennessee's a good team. I mean, including the Seattle game, I think they've lost 5 games by 4 points or less. So I think what it does, it just speaks to the depth of our league. There's a lot of good players that are littered throughout rosters, on active rosters, on practice squads. And it speaks to the coaching as well, because going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, you're really focused on that individual week. So what do we need to do that week to get our players prepared to give them the best opportunity to win? So it's really a credit to the players and the coaches in our league, and just speaks to the overall competitive nature of what we see on a week-to-week basis.
Okay, it's time for the Tennessee question. And I know we had this 2 weeks ago, but we're not going to hit the rewind button because it's a little bit different than it was 2 weeks ago. Last week, they started Ryan Tannehill at quarterback. Derrick Henry, who you handled great in the Texans-Titans matchup, last week he was back against the Seahawks, so you got to be ready for anything.
Yeah, no, Derrick's a good back. He's been a good back for a long time. We'll see where they are kind of in the quarterback situation. But, Ryan played last week. Ryan has a lot of experience. He's played a lot of good football. He's played very well over the course of his career. So just big picture, when you look at the Titans offensively, I mean, it's really Henry and Spears. I mean, you can't discount, Tajay and his, I'd say, versatility and was able to do. And then Chig and DeAndre have been a big part of the passing game. So you always have to account for those players, make sure that you certainly don't lose sight of their ability to impact the game. And then defensively, a player who was a huge factor in the game was Danico Autry. And Danico has done this for a number of years now. You're talking about a guy, here's a good example of a player that wasn't drafted. So here we are 10, 11 years later. He's still having a pretty significant impact during the course of the game. So we had problems with him during the course of the game. Aziz made a lot of tackles. We kind of talked about him at linebacker there going into the game. And their secondary has been a little bit, there's just not a revolving door, but they've just had a lot of players in and out because of injuries and because of some of the personnel adjustments they've been forced to make. So it really not too much has changed relative to what we talked about a few weeks ago, but I think having an understanding of who can really impact the game, we certainly have to have a heightened awareness of those particular players.
How hard is it to beat a team twice when you're playing them so close together on the schedule?
Yeah, it's really hard, and that game came down to literally the last play of the game. So it just speaks to how close the game was throughout. And, there's similar to the Cleveland game. We were down 13-0 and kind of scratched and clawed our way back there a little bit, made enough plays to win in the end. So we're expecting a really good battle. Tennessee is a good football team. We talk about the records, but at this time of the year, everybody has as good of an opportunity as anybody. I don't think anybody was talking about the Raiders going into Kansas City and beating Kansas City, but the Raiders obviously had belief, and they turned the ball over twice, scored twice on defense. So you really have to take care of the important things, and if you don't take care of those things, then you're going to put yourself at risk for not being able to win a football game. So a lot of respect for Tennessee and the program that they have and the players on their team. So we're going to have a good week of preparation and try to go out there and play a good football game.
Yeah, it wasn't the showing you wanted against the Browns, but it's over, and it's really irrelevant, right? You have these final two games. You have an opportunity here. And I wrote that, hey, back in July, what I wanted for Christmas was to be in the hunt category on the big playoff picture screen over Christmas. And here we are. And you have that chance here, Nick. Where is this team now versus maybe your preseason expectations? Or were you just thinking one game at a time, let's see where it goes?
Yeah, I think in the preseason, you're just focused on what's our team going to look like, who are the players that are going to make up the actual roster, and just try to put a foundation in place. And then once the season starts, you're kind of breaking it up into quarters, and your team kind of changes and evolves during the course of the season. But we're very fortunate to be in the position that we're in, to have an opportunity to play meaningful games here the last few weeks of the season. There's no games that are more important than your division. So the last two games here are going to be in the division. We have a big task in front of us with Tennessee. We're expecting a good football team to come in here. So we know we're going to have to play good football, but I think the players understand. I don't want to say there's a heightened sense of urgency, overall awareness, but the opportunity is in front of us. But I think the focus is in trying to have a good week of preparation. And if we have a good week of preparation, then we have to go out there and be able to execute. And that's really where the focus is.
All right, give me a little picture here of the off-season plan so far, because you're already making hotel reservations for the Combine, the Senior Bowl, all of that stuff, getting ready to get your guys out there.
Yeah, well, we're going to flip the page here very quickly whenever our season does end. So you're starting to see, some of the bowl games have started to take place here. Matter of fact, we'll have the shameless plug for the tax bowl for Oklahoma State and Texas A&M here coming up this week. So we're going through bowl season, and as soon as bowl season is over, the All-Star season is going to start. So there's a few bowl games that first or second week there. I'm talking about All-Star games here in January, and at the end of the month, you're going to have the East-West, you're going to have the Senior Bowl, and then shortly thereafter, you're going to have the Scouting Combine. So it's the coaching staff will kind of flip the page and hopefully be able to get some time away, evaluate our team, and then start to prep for some of the off-season team-building exercises. But as soon as the season is over, from a playing standpoint, while we're still playing, we're still working on some things. You're going to have the underclassmen declarations that are going to take place over the next few weeks. So there's a lot of balls that are in the air, so you just want to try to stay as organized as you possibly can, and our staff is on top of it, and just get ready for the 2024 team and putting that together. But we have plenty of work in front of us for 2023, so we're not going to get too far ahead of ourselves.
Are those all-star practices more important because you see the interaction and the day-to-day of the players?
Yeah, the practices are a huge part of it. Here's really what you're trying to do is just evaluate the player, and you have an opportunity. Maybe they do some drills that they don't do with their normal college practices, so you'll see not 9-on-7. You'll see one-on-one. You'll see one-on-ones in a field, offensive, defensive linemen, one-on-one linebackers, running backs, tight ends, one-on-ones, corners, and receivers. Sometimes you don't get to see that in college, I would say, settings because the teams don't really do that. So there's a more individualized component. I'd say that's really where those 2 or 3 days you get to see some of those exposures are really good. And then you have an opportunity to really sit with the player and start to go through some questions that you may have about the player, maybe about their background, maybe about something they're doing schematically. So that's where this is an opportunity for us to really get to know the player on a personal level and kind of see where they are in their overall development and just use the information to try to put together a picture of a player so that whenever we do add the player to the team, we have an understanding of really what we're getting when that player walks in.
All right, it is New Year's. New Year's resolutions.
I don't do resolutions.
Well, I was gonna say, a guy like you understands that you could start a new thing at any time of year, right? You don't have to wait for January 1. Is that how you see life in general?
Yeah, my life is one day at a time. So try to have a consistent routine, and that's where the focus is. Not all of a sudden when the new year starts, we could flip the calendar and all of a sudden we're going to change. So just try to be consistent in everything that we're trying to do. So maybe I can do some things on the home front. So maybe that'll be my resolution for the year. But no, it's always good to kind of turn the page on 23. We have a lot to be thankful for over this past year, and hopefully we have a lot more to be thankful about in the new year whenever that comes about.
Aside from the way you were raised, though, do you feel like having played sports as a kid helps you as an adult when you're trying to start a new routine and break in a new good habit in your life?
Sure. I mean, sports have been a huge part of my life since I started playing baseball when I was 6 years old. So, I mean, played 6, 7, 8-year-old baseball and then got into 5th, 6th grade, started playing football when I was in 5th grade. And my thought process was you just kind of go from one season to the next. So you go from football in the fall to basketball. So having to go through there, it takes a certain amount of discipline, and you have to get on a schedule and you got to make sacrifices, and it's all tied together. So I was fortunate and I was raised the right way by my mom and dad, and to emphasize the things that are important. And, once I started my athletic career, and I think what you're trying to do as you go, if you're looking for ways to modify or adjust, and I think that's all of us and whatever line of work that we're in. I'm sure I'm different, than I was 10 years ago relative to my thought process, relative to but I think that's part of learning and growing and developing. But when you have that foundation in place, I mean, I don't want to say it makes it a little bit easier, but, you learn at an early age just to kind of balance multiple things. So very fortunate to, be raised the right way and to be involved in sports. And I've loved sports since I was a little kid. It's been a big part of my life without question.
Well, thanks so much for the time, Nick. Happy New Year, and looking forward to Sunday against the Titans. Good luck.
Thank you, Mark.